Good morning. My name is Dan Jaffe. I'm an attorney and I'm the CEO of Lawlytics. Before going into technology full-time about 7 years ago, I practiced law for about 10 years and used the internet for that whole time to build and sustain my practice. And some of the concepts that we're going to be presenting in this webinar are concepts that were around even 15 or more years ago. And some of the things that I stepped in personally, Victoria Blute, who's going to be presenting the bulk of this webinar, will be pointing out to you. This webinar is being recorded, so for those of you who are in attendance, there's no need to take notes. We'll make the recording as well as the slide deck available on our website soon after the webinar is over. And if you end up having to leave early, you'll be able to watch it in its entirety as well. We are going to reserve some time at the end for a question and answer session. We are going to move through the materials quite rapidly during this webinar, and so we won't be able to stop and address questions as they arise. But what we ask you to do is put them either into the chat area or the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel, and from there we'll be able to see them, organize them, and then we can start addressing them once the presentation is completed. Victoria Blute, who is our community director, will be presenting most of the dangerous practices that we want to share with you today. She's going to focus on practices that a lot of people are still selling as things that you can and should do with Google and with search engine optimization. Once she gets through those, I'm going to jump back in just real briefly. I just have one point that I'm going to be making, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers at that point. With that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Victoria. Victoria, can you hear me?
Thank you so much, Dan. Yeah, I can hear you. So this morning we are going to talk about dangerous web practices that can sink your firm. Just to give you a quick introduction to myself. Oops. Sorry about that. My name is Victoria Blute. I'm the community manager here at Lawlytics. My job basically is to keep my ear to the ground, to keep you guys in the know about what sort of web practices will benefit your law firm and which ones may get you in trouble with Google. So without further ado here, let's talk about what is going to be included in this webinar. Here's a little bit about what we're going to cover. I'll do a real quick introduction to how search engines work. If you're interested in learning more about that, I do recommend going to the Lawlytics blog and searching for our content planning clinic. I've discussed search engines and search engine history in depth there. Once I've discussed that and made sure everyone is up to speed, we'll talk about, in general, what Google looks for in a quality web page. And once we've talked about what you should be doing, we'll get into the reason that you're here, which is learning about what sort of web practices are dangerous to your firm. We'll be talking about this primarily from an SEO angle, and Dan, as he said, will join us again at the end to talk a little bit about some issues that can come up outside of that. But we'll also talk about one of the very easiest ways to stay out of trouble on the web. And if you join us regularly for our webinars, I think you may have an idea of what that's going to involve. But But before we get started, one thing I think that I feel attorneys should be able to take away from this webinar is that, yes, there are definitely a lot of ways that you can get your law firm into hot water on the web, but there are also some very easy, low-effort ways not to, and by keeping that in mind, you may avoid having to sit around worrying about each item on the don't do this list, and focus more on the simple elements that will not only keep you out of trouble, but ultimately provide potential clients with what they're looking for in such a way that, when done correctly, can help to boost your law firm's business. So let's get started here. Let's talk a little bit about how search engines work. 3 basic steps here: crawling, indexing, and retrieval. So the first thing that Google does is that it sends out its Google bots, and they're also sometimes called spiders or crawlers, however you like to refer to them. Google has them, and they are busy crawling the web all the time. They follow links from page to page, see what's there, and then Google goes ahead and sorts those pages by content and some other factors. And once Google finds a web page, figures out what's there, it adds it to its massive index. And it does this so that it can quickly access the information when somebody asks Google a question and it decides that web page or website is relevant to that question. The last step is retrieval, and that's what all the crawling and indexing is for. So at that point, Google is asked a question and then decides what's most relevant, pulls that information from its index, and delivers those pages as search results. So that is how search engines work generally. They've improved a lot over time. When they first started, they were not always so easy to use. Early search engines were primarily keyword-based, like when Google started in the early 90s, or in the mid-90s rather. Sites were ranked based on mentions on other sites, and that was not a great system because people figured out how to manipulate it. It was really the beginning of black hat search engine optimization, or SEO as we call it. Because Google's methods weren't all that great at that time, it left a lot of room for people who wanted to trick the system. And the biggest part of tricking the system was having web pages rank more highly than potentially they really deserved. And black hat SEO became a very serious problem for search engines because Google's goal, by its own motto, is to provide quality information for people who are looking for it, to really organize all of the world's information in a way that's easy to access. And unfortunately, black hat SEO made that more difficult made it more difficult for Google to make that a reality. There were a lot of people who wanted to have their website returned in search results ranked more highly than it deserved, and how they did that was through black hat SEO. They basically filled search engines with nothing but spam. As I said earlier, it was really a keyword-based system at that time, and so what you could do was stuff a website full of keywords, regardless of what other content you actually provided or how natural those keywords sounded in what you were writing, and have it rank pretty highly. But that was really frustrating for users because they were trying to find answers to their questions, one of the main reasons that people use search engines, and instead they would click on links that would provide them with nothing valuable, just spam entirely. So at that time, black hat providers were making a lot of money, but Google was getting very frustrated because that's not what they'd set out to do. They really wanted to provide quality information to people. So what Google did is that they got smarter. Google later introduced search algorithms like Panda and Penguin into their overall set of algorithms that they use. I just learned yesterday, in fact, that Panda has now been integrated into the core search algorithm for Google, which is quite interesting. It's really two of their biggest web spam fighting tools, and they work pretty well. These algorithms, as I said, busy searching the internet for web spam. Panda came out in 2011, and that's focused on finding low-quality websites, ones that have thin content, don't really offer anything to people who are viewing them. Penguin was introduced a year after that, and that algorithm is busy decreasing the rankings of websites that violate Google's webmaster guidelines, and we'll talk about those more in depth a little bit later. The bottom line here is that Google is getting smarter about spotting content that doesn't do anything for users. And these algorithms are making search engines better. Google has also recently introduced RankBrain, which is a piece of artificial intelligence that is busy learning about the way that people naturally use language so that Google can continue to give searchers better results. Google really cares about high-quality content because that is the core thing that people are using search engines for, finding information to help them make decisions. So that's why Google wants you to make websites for users and not for search engines, and their guidelines very much reflect that. So let's talk a little bit about what Google sees as the criteria for a good website or a web page. And the basic elements are divided into three sections. We have design and content, we have the technical elements, and the quality elements. So we'll talk about design and content first. And that said, this is by no means an exhaustive list of what Google is looking for. I definitely recommend that lawyers Googling something from Google, Googling Google's quality guidelines for a real in-depth look. But these were some of the elements that really stuck out to me where perhaps law firm websites are concerned. The first is in regard to creating useful information-rich sites. As I said before, Google wants webmasters to create these sites that clearly and accurately describe your content. You want to ensure that your content is easy to read and to understand. so that Google can determine when that content is relevant to a query. And the person asking the query can quickly make use of that information that you've provided. And both on the search engine side and on the search engine user side, if they come to expect that your website regularly posts this kind of content, not only will Google come back to regularly crawl your website for new information, but search engine users may come back again and again to learn more about what you have to say. If they feel that they can trust the information that you offer, it may help them to make a decision about hiring your law firm or recommending you to someone else. The second point here, what are people asking? Google wants you to think about the words that users would type to find your pages and make sure your site actually includes those words within it. Keywords are important. That was sort of the founding part of how search engines work, but they're important in a different sense than they used to be. The volume of your keywords won't somehow get you better rankings, but using phrases that involve these words and address the questions that might come along with those words will definitely help you. And that's really something that you do as you naturally write content. You don't sort of, how do I say, stuff things with keywords as we talked about earlier. The third has to do with avoiding user frustrations. Site mapping is a great way to help that. Google says to offer a site map to your users with links that point to the important parts of your site. So users not only want answers to their questions, and they want those answers quickly, but they also don't want to do, as I often say, mental gymnastics to find those answers. I talked a little bit earlier about sort of how users were getting frustrated with the original way that search engines worked, and Google is really working to make sure that users have access to content that answers their questions and quickly. And so you want to make sure that your website is really in line with making things as frustration-free as possible for users. So let's talk about Google's technical guidelines. Again, not an exhaustive list, but I think these are ones that are particularly valuable. The first point is to think about how other people view your site. You may be viewing your website from your desktop computer, from a laptop, but those are not, of course, the only ways that people view a website. People are using mobile devices more than ever, and a myriad broad range of devices to search the web, whether that's a tablet or a mobile phone. So you want to, as I mentioned in the previous slide, avoid frustrating people. And if they struggle to access your site from a particular browser, they are going to be frustrated and they may not come back to visit your site. The second point is that good content is not equivalent to a good website. You want to make sure that you're monitoring your site's performance and optimize load times. Good content is very, very important to your website or blog, but if your site is glitchy or takes a long time to load, I wouldn't expect search engine users to stick around. We live in a time where we have very little patience for things that we cannot access immediately, particularly on the internet. The third point is to make sure your site is crawlable. You want to make sure that not only you have great content, but that content gets seen. Google says to help Google fully understand your site's contents, you want to allow all of your site's assets, CSS and JavaScript files to be crawled. Surely you would be unhappy if you're putting in the time and the effort to write great content and it's not being seen properly by Google, which in turn means that potential clients are not seeing it either. So lastly, we'll talk about quality. These are some of the basic principles that guide quality, and for the most part, they're really just reinforcements of what we've talked about already. And you'll hear us reinforce this again as we talk about dangerous web practices. That first bullet point there, making pages for users, not for search engines. We've talked about this again and again, and you can see why. People have a need for and prefer high-quality content, but conveniently, that's also what search engines want too. High-quality content is really at the intersection of what search engines want, what search engine users want, and what referral sources want. So again, content, very important. The second bullet point Could you tell a Google employee about what you're doing? If you're engaging in black hat SEO practices or have that sinking feeling that what you're doing might not be entirely above board when it comes to rankings or traffic, ask yourself, could you honestly tell a Google employee what you're doing? And if you feel a little funny about that, you may want to reconsider your strategy. The last point is to make your content unique. That really does matter. The internet would have nothing new to offer us if everyone just wrote the same thing. Attorneys will want to consider that every day millions of searches are made that themselves are totally unique. Google has never ever seen them before. And that's a point that's, in my opinion, not only fascinating, but helpful to lawyers in terms of really creating unique content. People are asking all sorts of new and interesting questions all the time. Dan had mentioned in our content planning clinic a few weeks ago that one major myth we see often is that search engines are dumb and so are clients, and that is definitely not the case for either. In response to these unique searches as well as complex or obscure queries, Google is busy improving their algorithms and building artificial intelligence that is designed for the express purpose of handling complicated queries that people naturally ask. People ask things in all sorts of different ways. So now we move on to the reason why you're here. So we've talked about how Google does what it does and what sort of things the company is looking for in a quality website. But now let's talk about specific practices that are worth avoiding. And we're going to start with content problems. And as I talk about each of these, based upon what we've already discussed, I think you'll see pretty quickly why Google finds these to be problematic. So the first one is automatically generated content. And just like it sounds, this is content that is sometimes created by a program. And like you might expect from something created from a program, it's about as good as what a program can produce. A lot of times this consists of strings of phrases that don't make a whole lot of sense, but contain certain search keywords. Another way that this can happen is when content is strung together in pieces and parts from other websites and web pages and without adding anything of sufficient value. Next up is thin content, and again, just like it sounds, basically it's just shallow material. It's content that doesn't add anything valuable or significant to the conversation, and Google, big surprise, does see that as a violation of its guidelines. Last up, I have scraped and duplicate content. So scraped content, again, is a problem, and some of the ways that Google defines scraped content is, for example, a site that directly copies and republishes content from another site without adding anything of value, as well as copying parts of content or modifying it just slightly before republishing. And that doesn't only apply to the written word, interestingly. Sites that dedicate themselves to embedding multimedia content, such as videos or images and other media, from other sites without providing anything of added value, are also considered to be scraping content. Duplicate content has sort of a similar theme. That generally refers to blocks of content that match or closely match content elsewhere on the web. And that can even include from your own website. So why in the world would anyone have the same content of several of their web pages? Well, it depends. Again, this is a tactic meant to try and increase search rankings, at least when it's done intentionally. But the goal here is to really minimize similar content in the event that you have pages that are quite similar. One way Google recommends to do that is by consolidating those very similar pages into one page, or on the other end, expanding the information on each page so that it becomes less similar, that they are really expanded, detailed pages that describe something. Next up, we can talk about link schemes. And what are we talking about when we say link schemes? Google defines this as links that are intended to manipulate a site's ranking in Google search results. And that includes any behavior that manipulates links to your site or outgoing links from your site. Examples of how this might happen are if you exchange money for links, or posts that contain links, if you exchange goods or services for links, sending someone a quote-unquote free product in exchange for them writing about it and including a link, excessive link exchanges, sort of the back-scratching, link to me and I'll link to you, or partner pages exclusively for the sake of cross-linking. And again, we see the automated aspect here. Anything that's automatically making links or content may get you into hot water. Other practices worth avoiding. I grouped cloaking and sneaky redirects together here. They're slightly related to each other. Let's talk about cloaking first. As it says here, cloaking is what happens if you present different content or addresses to human users and search engines. An example you might see of cloaking would be serving a page of HTML text to search engines while showing a page of images or Flash to users. Google sees this as a problem, they say, because it's deceptive in its quality. It doesn't provide search engine users with what they were looking for in the first place. As for sneaky redirects, similar theme. First, we should say that Google notes there are many good reasons to redirect from one address to the other. Say, if you're moving your site to a new address, or you're consolidating several pages into one. But some redirects are meant to deceive search engines or display content to human users that's different than what's made available to search engines. And that is a problem. Because when a redirect is implemented in that way, search engines might index the original page rather than follow the redirect, while users are taken to the redirect target. Like cloaking, this is a practice that's deceptive because it attempts to display different content to users and to Google's crawlers, and that can take a visitor somewhere other than where they expected to go. In terms of avoiding these practices, pretty easy to do if you consider how annoyed you might be as a search engine user looking for information only to be directed elsewhere when you thought you were on the right track to finding the answer to your question. So the next two I'll talk about here are sort of in the old school black hat SEO area. They're old tactics, but I think they're worth talking about because you'll want to know what you're looking at should you see something like this come up. I recently published a post on our blog about an old black hat SEO tactic that, for whatever reason, has managed to sort of rear its ugly head again, kind of like the resurgence in a disease long thought to be wiped out. However, that problem was affecting a very small number of sites, and you can bet that Google probably has their eye on it and will be adjusting their algorithms accordingly to sort that problem out quickly. So here it is. Keyword stuffing. We talked about it earlier, but again, the practice of loading up a web page with keywords that you're trying to manipulate your ranking. As I'd said, in the early days of search engines, this was a very useful tactic, and it looks sort of like what I am showing you on your screen right now, if not just the word keyword stuffing over and over and over again, if that was your keyword. As I said, at the time, used to be a useful tactic, not so much anymore. Search engines are really too smart for this one. Another practice that is worth avoiding is hidden links and text. The most popular way to do this in the past was white text on white background. The result, of course, being that a human user couldn't detect that text when it was on the same color as a web page, but Google could see it. And here we have yet another attempt to manipulate rankings, and also another old tactic that Google at this point is really too smart for. But as you can see here, there are some other ways to try and do this that I've listed, whether you're locating text behind an image or setting the font size to 0. Another interesting one I've seen is hiding a link in one character. So for example, you place the link in a hyphen in the middle of a paragraph. Yes, very deceptive, not recommended. And lastly, I would like to talk about doorway pages. What do we mean when we talk about a doorway page? As the definition here says, they are sites or pages created to rank highly for specific search queries. Here are some examples of that. Firstly, having multiple domain names or pages targeted at specific regions or cities that funnel users to one page. Or another example, pages generated to funnel visitors into the actual usable or relevant portion of your website. Creating something that has substantially similar pages that are close to search results than rather like a clearly defined browsable hierarchy. Doorway pages are a bad idea because they're bad for users. That can lead to users giving users multiple pages in search results that are basically the same page, and that's not real helpful when you're looking for an answer. And that can lead to issues where when the result takes users to the very same page, if you're a search engine user and you decide that you're going to pick what's behind proverbial door number 3, only to discover that it's not useful or not as useful as it could be, and then if you open doors number 1 and 2, you're left similarly disappointed and without answers. And that's not good for the user, and it's not good for Google as a company. Google, of course, has a vested interest in making sure that they provide users with quality sites and information. Google wants to give its users the most useful information with the least amount of effort required, and doorway pages can sometimes serve as an intermediate page that's not nearly as useful as a user's final intended destination. So that's a lot of stuff, isn't it? That is a lot of different items to think about and keep straight. We've talked a lot about what you shouldn't do, but what is one easy thing that you can do which can eliminate a lot of the worrying about all of these technical elements? And the answer to that is in writing high-quality content on a regular basis. And those of you who tune in regularly to our webinars could probably guess that's what was coming, but there's a reason for that. Writing quality, significant content that helps potential clients answer questions is really at heart what Google wants from websites. That's why they say to make pages primarily for users and not for search engines. That's why that mantra sort of exists. People are really looking for superb, detailed information that helps them to answer questions and make those decisions quickly, and therefore that is exactly what Google wants to provide. So while I've talked a lot here about primarily SEO-related practices that can get you into trouble, I'm going to turn it over to Dan now so he can discuss some of the other aspects that will be of interest to lawyers as they control and develop their web presence. Dan?
Thank you, Tori. Give me just a second to get my screen up here.
Sure.
Can you see my screen now? It should be on the same slide that you were at.
I can.
Okay, great. Well, so let's see if I can advance this thing. There we go. For those of you who have attended many of my webinars, you know that I'm typically not very picture-driven. With this one, I couldn't resist, though. The topic that I want to talk about is not just PPC, which stands for pay-per-click advertising, but really all types of disposable online advertising, meaning you pay for somebody to come to your website, and once that person has come to your website, they are either going to do something on your website that you want them to do, become a client or not, but one way or the other, that money is gone. I want to make it very clear from the outset that at Lawlytics, we are not anti-pay-per-click or disposable advertising by any means. However, we aim to guide our attorneys to get the best return on investment, not just in the short term, but over the long haul, and to be able to build their websites into appreciating assets rather than just spend money online. And the problem with getting dependent on pay-per-click, which is where a lot of web vendors want you as an attorney to be because it is a good revenue stream for them. There's not a whole lot of work involved, and there's really not a whole lot of variability in it either. It's predictable. It will get clicks. Whether those clicks turn into clients or not is a whole different story. But typically when web marketers are measuring it, they say, we'll get you the clicks. It's your problem to turn them into customers or not. Whether or not pay-per-click is working, getting a flow of traffic to and through your website using disposable advertising that you pay for can give you a false sense of security and make you think that you're getting more of a value than you actually are out of your web marketing, and make you somewhat blind to the fact that your practice is really at the whim of these ads. And most importantly, the thing that concerns us the most is if you focus on pay-per-click to start out with and you start seeing some success with it early on, that success can distract you very easily from what I see as a very urgent need to establish yourself as an online thought leader. And we've talked about becoming an online thought leader in other webinars, so I won't go into that in detail now, and I'm sure we'll be covering it again very soon as well. But if you have to pay people or pay for people to come to your website, you're not a thought leader. If people come to you based on things that you've written, things that other people are sharing, based on rankings that the search engine have given it, you've established yourself as a thought leader or are on the way to becoming one. The real problem that I see with being dependent on pay-per-click advertising is that it reminds me of yellow page advertising when I started practicing in the mid-late 90s. If you think back to if you were practicing at that time to that era, typically the firm that relied on marketing that was willing to spend the biggest amount of money with the yellow pages to buy the double page ad or the triple truck or the internal fold out or the back cover or the spine or the magnet thing or whatever else they would dream up to sell to people. And usually it was, at least when I was practicing in those early days, it was sold typically to attorneys. But the problem is that somebody can always come along and outspend you when the only factor in your marketing that differentiates you from somebody else is how much you're spending. And anybody that's been around and has been watching pay-per-click prices over the last several years has seen its meteoric rise, especially in the area of marketing for legal services. Not only are attorneys competing with each other now for these ads, but they're competing with non-legal entities that are selling legal services. When, just as an example, when I first started doing pay-per-click advertising, when I was a fairly young attorney in the early 2000s, I think it was with a company called Overture, which was later bought and subsumed into, I think it was either Yahoo or Google, I can't remember. But I was literally paying a penny to 3 pennies per click for very good traffic because nobody else was doing it. And so my CAC, or if I have my attorney hat on, I'm thinking about CAC as cost to acquire a client. As a CEO, I'm thinking about it as cost to acquire a customer. Either way, it's the same thing. How much money do you have to spend to get enough visitors to go to your website to turn at least one of those visitors into a new client? And as that goes up, now we've seen pay-per-click ads for one click as high as nearly $700 for some personal injury phrases. And so it can get very draining. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars a month with nothing to show for it if it's not done right. And the scary thing about it is that if you are doing it right, and your competitors see that you're succeeding and they see your ads, not only are they going to click on those ads costing you money, but they're going to understand, and every marketer that is trying to get their business is also going to understand that all they need to do to be competitive with you or even to dethrone you is bid slightly more than you on that ad and be willing to spend slightly more money. There are other factors that are involved, but what it really comes down to is how much are you willing to spend on your advertising. And once that click is done, whether it's a wasted click from an advertiser or marketer trying to sell you additional services, whether it's a competitor, whether it's one of your firm members or relatives who sees it, who doesn't understand that that's costing you money every time it's clicked, there's a lot of waste that goes on with pay-per-click advertisement. In fact, across the board, when we look at the statistics of attorneys who have traffic from both pay-per-click ads and from organic sources, the traffic that comes in from organic sources, meaning that it's earned, meaning that there's a reason for somebody to be there other than they saw an advertisement, those people tend to stay longer and engage with the material more. Pay-per-click advertising doesn't build anything of value. Once that dollar is spent, it's spent, and you're back to zero. And our argument, and this is why we segued from Tori talking about content into me talking about pay-per-click, is that we really feel that that money can and should be invested better elsewhere for the long term. Content is the better investment to make at this point. It's going to pay off better in the long term. What we don't want to do is completely talk you out of doing pay-per-click, because again, it can serve its purpose, especially as an interim measure while you're building up ranking and organic traffic through content. But we don't want you to get dependent on it. With that, we are going to end this substantive section, and we are going to open it up for questions. While Tori was talking, I saw several questions that came in and have documented them. So Tori, if you want to open up your mic so you're able to chime in as well, I'll just go through these questions and we can both answer them. The first question that came in is, what is a sitemap and is it necessary? And there are really two different types of sitemaps. One is called an XML sitemap, and that is basically machine language, and it's meant for the search engines to know when your page is crawled and when pages are, or when your page should be crawled rather, when the page has been updated, when new pages have been added, etc., etc. Lawlytics has that built in. There's nothing for you to do. The other is an HTML sitemap, which is something that is available for your visitors to look at. And it is more necessary to have that kind of page if you don't have your navigation well organized. If you have your navigation well organized so that somebody can go to the top of your screen or to the sidebar if you have a vertical menu, and find what they're looking for intuitively, if things are nested where they should be, then there oftentimes is not a need for that HTML sitemap. Did you have anything to add to that, Tori?
I did not. I do see a question here that would be a good one for you, Dan. Are alt tags, oops, where'd it go? There we go. Are alt tags for images the same as hiding text behind an image?
Gotcha. No, they're not. Two different things. What Tori was talking about is basically, if you look at a web page, you see what you see from the human eye, and this is about burying things where nobody can see them, but in an attempt to influence the search engines. Alt tags serve a totally different purpose and are totally legitimate. Let's see. There was a question that was somewhat related to that, so I'm going to skip down to that. How can I tell if I have hidden text, keyword stuffing, or doorway pages on my website? Presumably this is based on maybe somebody else having had control of your website either now or at some point in the past. And really you have to go through and, to be sure, analyze the code on your website. If you do a search on Google, it will tell you all of the pages that Google has indexed, and you can accomplish that by typing in site, S-I-T-E, colon, and then your web domain. And so for example, if we were using the Lawlytics website, it would be site colon lawlytics.com, and that would show the pages that Google has indexed. And if you do that, say you expect that there are 20 pages on your website because that's what you can see, you do that kind of search and it turns up 200. You can go ahead and click through to those various pages and see what's there, and you may discover some things that you didn't know were there. You may discover doorway pages, for example. You may discover pages that people have added to try to fool the search engines in other ways. In terms of hidden text and keyword stuffing, I mean, if you look on your site, if you look at the bottom, for example, and your webmaster has added to every page a comma delineated list of all of the cities that you practice in or all of the areas that you practice, that's keyword stuffing. If you have sentences that read, Bob is a personal injury attorney who practiced personal injury law and is a personal injury lawyer, and your sentences read like that, that's keyword stuffing. In terms of hidden text, there's many places that it can hide. But for example, if somebody is using the same color text as your background to hide text from the human eye on your website, if you go through and use your mouse to highlight the whole page, that highlighting will oftentimes reveal text that the naked eye wouldn't be able to see. If you have a website that is on Lawlytics and we've imported it for you, you don't have to worry about that. Even if a prior webmaster did things like that, there won't be any trace of that left on your website currently. Unless there's content that we have not been employed to change by you, and then you should basically just read the content for the keyword stuffing issue. But there won't be any doorway pages, there won't be any hidden content or anything like that. If you are not on Lawlytics yet and you want some help determining whether you have any of these things, we're always happy to take a look for you, and just give us a call or submit a form from the website, and we're happy to get under the hood a little bit more. Next question is, how unique does the content need to be? Victoria, I don't want to steal all your thunder. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to take it?
I will let you answer, and then if I have any other additional things to say about it, I will chime in.
Okay. Well, so when we're as lawyers talking about the law on our websites, certainly there's only so many ways to talk about a certain case, to describe a statute, a penalty scheme, a statute of limitations, and so forth. We're not going to be able to say it uniquely every time, and it's certainly okay to quote things like statutes, case law, and so forth. It's also okay to reiterate foundational elements. So what you have to understand is that people come into your website from pages other than the front page, and you have very little time to get and keep their interest. And so if you avoid reiterating things to such an extent that a subpage, say it's a subpage of personal injury law that's talking about negligence, but it doesn't give any foundation on that page for somebody to know what negligence is, that may be more of a problem than duplicate content. And so really, when you're talking about duplicate content, you don't want to just go copy somebody else's page and add it to yours. You don't want to have content that you have on one page, say, let's say it's Las Vegas personal injury lawyer, and it's got basically the same content, and then you copy it and you just find and replace the words Las Vegas with the word Reno, or the word Tahoe, or whatever, as you go through the various geographical areas that you want to target. That would be bad, because the content that you're adding is clearly designed to fool the search engines, and it clearly doesn't add anything to the overall conversation. But if you are adding things that may be reiterative, but contextually they make sense, it's okay. And for the most part, as long as you're adding value to your human users, you're also adding value for the search engines.
And on that note as well, in terms of how unique does the content need to be, I think one frustration that can always come up is I don't know if I have an idea for how I want to present this content. And there are a lot of really interesting ways to present content, whether it's vocabulary enrichment for your users or the people visiting your website, terms that they might not be familiar with that are law related that you want to sort of give them an education about, question and answer sessions. You can write there are just so many different ways to do this. You can write sort of the listicle, if you will, 5 things you think you know about the law, but X, Y, and Z. There are a lot of really good ways to not only write unique content, but to present that content in a unique way that will capture the attention of your readers and also help you to write more unique content in the first place. We have some blogs over at the Lawlytics website to help get you started if you're stuck for an idea of how you want to present material or looking for a new way to present things. So I do recommend going to check those out as well.
Great, yeah, and we'll be covering that in more depth in future webinars as well. Various topics to write on, various structures and so forth. There is one more question, and then if nothing else comes in, we'll wrap this up. The question is, what if the company I used to use already did something, some of the bad practices like link schemes that Victoria mentioned? That's a tough one. There's a lot that somebody that previously was trying to fool Google could have done to your website to screw it up. And the real question is, how recoverable is it? Most of the time, we've seen sites recover quite well when the bad practices are removed. But there are so many factors in it that you really need to take it on a case-by-case basis and really do an in-depth analysis of whether the cost of trying to rehabilitate a site that might have bad practices done to it, how that stacks up against the delay and ramp up time of just starting with a brand new site. It looks like we have a couple, maybe more questions coming in. The question is, I understand that Google monitors the PPC. I'm not sure I understand the context of the question. Tori, do you have anything to add to that?
I do not. I think I would need a little more context to understand necessarily what's being asked here.
Marianne, if you want to elaborate on that, we can hold for about 30 seconds or so if you want to type in the question. If not, you can certainly give us a call if there's something you want to talk about more in depth, and we can discuss it offline as well.
And I don't see any other questions on my end here. Dan, do you have any others?
I do not. I'm just looking through my list to make sure we got everything. No, it doesn't. Oh, okay. So there's. Oh, okay. So the question is about click fraud, and basically if your competitors are clicking too many times, Google may intervene and stop that from happening. Yeah, they do have fraud control measures in place. I'm not exactly sure what the mechanics of those are. There's still, even if that were to work perfectly, everybody gets at least one click. And the big danger that I see and have observed for quite some time is that not only do competitors, and I think competitors are maybe the least of the cost of wasted clicks, it's these marketers. If they see that you're bidding for, let's say, Seattle personal injury lawyer, and it's like, I'm just pulling random numbers out, let's say it's $75 per click, the marketers know that you're spending that money already and that you are very willing to spend money. So it makes you a good prospect for them. And so how do they get your contact information? Well, of course, they see the ad, they click through, you spend the $75, they get your contact information, and they contact you. Sometimes they'll even contact you directly through your website, and you can trace it back to that pay-per-click. And then the next question, and this will be the final question unless anything else comes in, is when is a seminar being rebroadcasted? Typically, we've been able to get the recording up on the website within a few days. It may be up as early as tomorrow. The latest will be Monday. In our Friday newsletter, we will let you know where the link is if it's been published. If not, it'll go out with Monday's webinar reminders. Like to remind everybody that we have one additional webinar tomorrow. It's going to be focused on how to write for the web. And we're not going to be talking so much about substance as we will be about mechanics. And so if you are new to writing for the web, or you just want a refresher, that'll be a really good webinar to join us at. Tori, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
I do not. That's it for today.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. We'll see you hopefully tomorrow.